Ethiopian Orthodox/JEZ tradition. The ancient African Christianity, the Za spirit world, and the Rastafari thread. Ethiopia was Christian before Rome was. The Book of Enoch survived here when Europe had forgotten it. The Za spirits move through bodies in the same villages where the Tabot is carried on the priest's head in procession. Rastafari found its theology here, in Haile Selassie's coronation, in the Kebra Nagast, in the Solomonic line. Ancient Christianity, Ancient Africa, Ancient Israel, Inseparable. Personal Reading Series Halegricity, May 2026 IQ Productions. Contents. Introduction, The Layered Sacred Word of Ethiopia. Part 1, Ethiopian Christianity before Rome. Part 2, the Tewahedo Christology and why it matters. Part 3, the Guizi language and sacred canon. Part 4, the Book of Enoch, what Ethiopia preserved. Part 5, the Book of Jubilees and the Ethiopian sacred calendar. Part 6, the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings. Part 7, the Queen of Sheba, Solomon, and the Solomonic line. Part 8, the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia. Part 9, the Tabot, every church as the temple. Part 10, the Guizi liturgy, the world's oldest living liturgy. Part 11, the Akukwam, sacred dance and the sistrum. Part 12, Saint Yored and the sacred music tradition. Part 13, the Ethiopian monastic tradition. Part 14, Ethiopian saints, a different calendar. Part 15, the Beta Israel, the Jewish thread. Part 16, the Za tradition, spirit possession in Ethiopia. Part 17, the Za ceremony, ritual and practice. Part 18, how Za and Orthodox Christianity coexist. Part 19, Rastafari, the Ethiopian theological downstream. Part 20, Haile Selassie in Ethiopian and Rastafari understanding. Part 21, the Halegricity lens, the ancient convergence. Introduction. Ethiopia's sacred life is not one thing. It is the most extraordinary convergence of ancient streams in this entire Halegricity library, a Christian tradition older than the Roman Empire, conducting its liturgy in a language older than Arabic, preserving biblical texts that the Western Church lost or rejected, surrounding a central sacred claim that no other nation makes, alongside and intertwined with an indigenous African spirit possession tradition that has coexisted with Orthodox Christianity for centuries without the conflict that Western theology would predict, and downstream of an ancient Israelite tradition that practiced ancient Judaism for 2 millennia in complete isolation from the Talmudic mainstream. Ethiopia also gave Rastafari its theology. The Solomonic dynasty, the Kebra Nagast narrative of Africa as the chosen land, Haile Selassie's 1930 coronation, all of this produced the Rastafari movement's specific theological framework. To understand Rastafari at its roots is to understand Ethiopian sacred tradition. This guide covers all 3 layers, the Orthodox Christian tradition, the Za spirit world, and the Rastafari downstream, as a single, interlocking, mutually illuminating sacred word. Ethiopian Christianity before Rome. The standard Western account of Christian history begins with the Roman Empire's adoption of Christianity under Constantine in 313 CE and its consolidation under Theodosius in 380 CE, as if Christianity's legitimacy and spread began with Imperial Roman endorsement. Ethiopia's experience of Christianity is a direct refutation of this narrative. The Aksumite Empire adopted Christianity as its state religion in approximately 330 CE, under King Izona, before the Roman Emperor Theodosius had made Christianity Rome's official religion, before the Council of Nicaea had formalized Christian doctrine, before most of the events that Western Christian history treats as foundational had occurred. The Frumentius conversion. According to the historical account preserved by Rufinus of Okolea and confirmed by multiple Ethiopian sources, the conversion of the Aksumite Empire to Christianity occurred through the work of Frumentius, a Syrian Christian who was shipwrecked on the Ethiopian coast as a young man, entered the service of the Aksumite royal court, rose to a position of significant influence, and used that influence to promote Christianity among the court and merchants. When Frumentius traveled to Alexandria to request that a bishop be sent to Ethiopia, Athanasius of Alexandria consecrated Frumentius himself as the first bishop of Ethiopia, creating the direct apostolic connection between the Ethiopian Church and the Alexandrian tradition that continues to define Ethiopian Orthodox theology. The early 9 saints. Beyond Frumentius, the tradition of the 9 saints, Christian missionaries from Syria, Byzantium, and other parts of the Eastern Mediterranean who came to Ethiopia in the 5th and 6th century CE, was transformative for the Ethiopian Church's deep implantation in the culture. The 9 saints translated the Bible and other sacred texts into Guizi, established monasteries in the major highland regions, and developed the specifically Ethiopian forms of Christian practice that define the Ethiopian Church to this day. Among the 9 saints, Abba Aregawi, Abba Garima, and Abba Yored. These figures are not historical footnotes, they are the architects of Ethiopian Christian sacred practice as it exists today. The Tewahedo Christology and why it matters. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church takes its name from the Guizi word Tewahedo, unified or made one. This name encodes the Church's specific Christological position: Christ's divine and human natures are fully unified into one inseparable nature after the Incarnation. This position, called Miaphysitism, differs from the Chalcedonian formula adopted by Rome and Constantinople in 451 CE, and it was the specific theological difference that led to the separation of the Ethiopian, Coptic, Armenian, and Syriac churches from the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions after the Council of Chalcedon. Why the difference matters? This may seem like an arcane theological dispute, but it has profound practical implications. The Chalcedonian formula implies a certain distance between the divine and the human. Christ's humanity and divinity coexist but remain distinct. The Miaphysite formula implies a much more complete interpenetration of divine and human. In Christ, the divine has fully taken on the human and the human has fully been taken up into the divine. For Ethiopian Christianity, this means that the divine is closer, more completely incarnate, more fully present in the material world than Chalcedonian theology allows. This Miaphysite intimacy between divine and human is one of the factors that makes Ethiopian Orthodox spiritual life feel qualitatively different from Western Christianity. To those who experience both, the divine is expected to be immediately, physically, sensorially present in the liturgy, in the Tabot, in the sacred dance, in the blessed water and oil, in the specific material objects of the sacred tradition. The Guizi language and sacred canon. Guizi is the classical Semitic language of Ethiopia and Eritrea, closely related to the modern Amharic and Tigrinya languages, and more distantly related to Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic as a member of the South Semitic branch of the Semitic language family. It was the spoken language of the Aksumite Empire and ceased to be a vernacular language approximately 900-1000 CE, but it has been maintained continuously as the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church for over 1,600 years. GEEZ and the Sacred Canon. The Ethiopian Bible, 81 books. The Ethiopian Biblical Canon contains 81 books, significantly more than the Catholic Canon, the Protestant Canon, or the Eastern Orthodox Canon. The additional books preserved in the Ethiopian Canon include the Book of Enoch, possibly the most significant of the Ethiopian exclusive texts, a vast collection of visionary literature attributed to the biblical patriarch Enoch. Enoch contains elaborate descriptions of the heavenly realm, the fall of the watchers, the geography of the afterlife, astronomical teachings, and eschatological visions. 1 Enoch was known and cited by New Testament authors but was excluded from the Western biblical canon. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed its importance in Second Temple Judaism. The Ethiopian Church had been reading it continuously for 2,000 years. The Book of Jubilees, a retelling of Genesis through Exodus organized through a specific Jubilee calendar, providing a detailed alternative chronology and many additional details about the patriarchs not in Genesis. The Shepherd of Hermas, a 2nd century Christian apocalyptic text widely read in the early church. The Synodos, a collection of canonical church law. The significance: the Ethiopian Church's preservation of this text maintained connections to Second Temple Jewish Christianity that the Western Church lost after the 4th century canonization process. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, scholars found that texts the Ethiopian Church had preserved all along were suddenly confirmed as central to early Jewish and Christian thought. The Book of Enoch, what Ethiopia preserved. The Book of Enoch is arguably the most theologically significant of the texts preserved only in the Ethiopian biblical canon, a multi-part compilation of visionary literature whose influence on Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity was enormous but whose later exclusion from the Western canon rendered it largely unknown to Western audiences until the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed its importance. What 1 Enoch contains. The 5 books of 1 Enoch. The Book of the Watchers, the account of the Watchers, the divine beings who descended to earth, mated with human women, and produced the Nephilim. Their leaders taught humanity forbidden arts, metalworking, cosmetics, astrology, sorcery. This account provides the backstory for the flood narrative of Genesis. The Watcher's judgment, imprisonment in the underworld, and the punishment of humanity through the flood are the primary narrative. The Book of Parables, the most theologically charged section, featuring visions of the heavenly realm, the divine throne, and the mysterious figure of the Son of Man who will judge the living and the dead. This is the text that New Testament scholars believe was the primary background for Jesus' use of the Son of Man title. The Book of Astronomical Writings, the most ancient section, a detailed account of the solar and lunar calendars, the movements of the stars, and the sacred timekeeping system. The astronomical book advocates a 364-day solar calendar, different from the 354-day lunar calendar of mainstream Judaism. The Book of Dream Visions, 2 dream visions, the first about the flood, the second an animal apocalypse, in which the entire history of Israel from the patriarchs to the Maccabees is presented as a vision of animals. The Epistle of Enoch, ethical and eschatological teaching, including the Apocalypse of Weeks, a periodized history of human history organized through 10 weeks. 1 Enoch's influence on early Christian thought is pervasive. The New Testament Epistle of Jude quotes it directly. The imagery of the Son of Man, the heavenly throne room, the angelic hierarchy, the judgment of the wicked, and the final cosmic transformation all appear in New Testament texts in forms that are illuminated by their Enochic background. The Ethiopian Church's continuous preservation of 1 Enoch maintained a thread of Second Temple Jewish mysticism that the Western Church lost. The Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings. The Kebra Nagast is the supreme national epic and sacred text of Ethiopia, a 14th century compilation of oral and written traditions that establishes Ethiopia's unique sacred identity, traces the Solomonic dynasty's divine legitimacy, and narrates the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. It is simultaneously a theological treatise, a national foundation myth, and the primary source of the Ethiopian sacred narrative that Rastafari drew from. The Kebra Nagast Central Narrative. The Kebra Nagast Central Story. The Queen of Sheba travels to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon, whose wisdom she has heard spoken of throughout the known world. She stays for 6 months, learning from Solomon and sharing his court. As she prepares to leave, Solomon persuades her to spend one final night in his chamber, on the condition that she take nothing from the palace. During the night, she wakes thirsty and takes a cup of water. Solomon wakes and claims this as the price she owed him, his heir. Their union produces Menelik I, the first emperor of the Solomonic line. Menelik's journey and the Arkansas Menelik grows up in Ethiopia and eventually travels to Jerusalem to meet his father Solomon. Solomon recognizes and acknowledges him, desires him to stay in Jerusalem as his heir, but Menelik insists on returning to Ethiopia. Before his departure, in a specific account, the young men of Menelik's retinue steal the Ark of the Covenant from the temple and replace it with a copy, so that when Menelik and his companions depart for Ethiopia, they carry the Ark with them. Solomon discovers the theft and pursues them but cannot overtake them, understood in the narrative as the divine's approval of the Ark's transfer to Ethiopia, the new chosen land. The Kebra Nagast in Rastafari. The Kebra Nagast became the central text of Rastafari theology, particularly through the influence of Leonard Howard and other early Rastafari teachers who read it as a prophetic text establishing Africa as the true sacred homeland of African peoples worldwide. Key Rastafari uses of the Kebra Nagast, the Solomonic line. Haile Selassie traced his lineage directly to Solomon and Makeda, making him the 225th descendant of Solomon and the legitimate heir of the biblical covenant Ethiopia as Zion. The Kebra Nagast establishes Ethiopia as the new Zion, the land chosen by God when Jerusalem fell, giving Rastafari its theological framework for understanding Africa as the promised land. The Ark in Ethiopia, the confirmed presence of the Ark gives Ethiopia a sacred status unmatched by any other nation. The Black King, Marcus Garvey's prophecy found its fulfillment in Haile Selassie's 1930 coronation as Emperor of Ethiopia, framed through the Kebra Nagast establishment of the Solomonic line. The Tabot, every church as the temple. The Tabot, the sacred tablet housed in the Holy of Holies of every Ethiopian Orthodox church, is the most distinctive and most theologically significant element of Ethiopian Christian worship. It is the material expression of the belief that every Ethiopian church is a replica of the Jerusalem temple, that the Tabot represents the tablets of the 10 commandments within the Ark, that the church's three-zone structure replicates the temple's three-zone structure, and that the divine's presence, which was concentrated in the Ark in Jerusalem, is concentrated in the Tabot in every Ethiopian church. The Tabot, theology and practice. What a tablet is: a flat tablet, typically of wood, though some are stone, inscribed with the name of the saint to whom the church is dedicated. Each church has its own tablet. A church without a tablet is not a real church and cannot conduct a valid Eucharist. Where it is kept, the tablet is kept in the Magdas, the innermost sanctuary of the church, separated from the rest of the building by curtains. Only ordained priests may enter the Magdas. The congregation never sees the tablet directly. In procession, on major holy days, the tablet is removed from the Magdas, covered completely in richly embroidered cloth so that no one sees it, and carried on the head of the senior priest in procession through the community. This procession, accompanied by the akukwam dance, the kebra drum, the sistrum, and the community's singing, is the most complete liturgical enactment of the Ark of the Covenant narratives from the Hebrew Bible. The parallel, the Zulu Omsomo, the Yoruba Assentimento, the Vodou Vev, the Shinto Goshintai, all are expressions of the same recognition. The divine's presence concentrates in specific material objects that serve as the interface between the visible and invisible worlds. The Tabot is the Ethiopian Church's supreme expression of this universal recognition. The Guizi liturgy, the world's oldest living liturgy. The divine liturgy of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is conducted in Guizi, the ancient Ethiopian language that ceased to be a spoken vernacular approximately 1,000 years ago but has been maintained without interruption as the Church's liturgical language. This makes it, along with the Coptic liturgy, one of the world's oldest continuously practiced liturgical traditions. The structure of the Kiddes. The divine liturgy, structure and elements. The preparatory rites. The Kiddes begins before the sun rises. Priests and deacons gather before dawn for extensive preparatory prayers, washings, and the specific ceremonies that precede the main liturgy. The pre-dawn quality of darkness and gradually increasing light is understood as liturgically significant. The liturgy of the word, readings from the epistles and gospels in Guizi, with responses from the deacons and congregation. The specific readings follow the Ethiopian lectionary, a different schedule from the Western or Eastern Orthodox systems. The akukwam, at specific points, particularly at the beginning, at the gospel reading, and at specific transitional moments, the akukwam is performed. Deacons and sometimes priests perform the specifically choreographed movements with prayer staves and sistrums, accompanied by the kebra drum. The specific movements communicate specific liturgical content. The Kiddes, the Eucharistic liturgy, conducted primarily within the Magdas in the presence of the Tabot, with the priest performing the specific sequences of prayer that transform the bread and wine. The congregation does not enter the Magdas, the transformed elements are brought to them. The duration, a complete Kiddes with all preparatory rites can last 5 to 6 hours. This is not unusual. The faithful participate as much as they are able, arriving and departing as their capacity allows. The akukwam sacred dance and the sistrum. The akukwam is the sacred liturgical dance of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the specific ceremonial movement practice performed by priests and deacons during the Kiddes and during major holiday processions, using prayer staves and sistrums as sacred instruments. The sistrum and ancient Egypt. The sistrum, a metal rattle with crosspieces through which metal discs slide and jingle, is one of the most ancient sacred instruments in human history, used in the temples of ancient Egypt for at least 3,000 years before the Ethiopian Church began using it. It appears in Egyptian sacred art associated with the goddesses Hathor and Isis. It was the primary sacred instrument of the Isis cult that spread throughout the Roman Empire. The Ethiopian Church's use of the sistrum in Christian liturgy is a direct material transmission from the pre-Christian African sacred tradition, the same instrument, the same function, in a new theological context. The prayer staff. The makomia is the T-shaped or crotch-shaped staff used by priests and deacons during the akukwam, serving both as a physical support for extended standing during long liturgies and as a sacred implement whose specific movement patterns are part of the dance. The specific ways the makomia is held, moved, and tapped on the floor during the akukwam communicate specific liturgical content within the tradition. Connection to haligicity. The akukwam is the most complete surviving example of the integration of African sacred music and movement into a Christian liturgical framework, and it demonstrates that this integration was not a late addition or a compromise with pagan elements but an original feature of one of the world's most ancient Christian traditions. The same principle operates in Candombo, in Vodou, and in Zulu sacred gathering. The body that moves in the specifically prescribed sacred way is a body being prepared as a vehicle for divine presence. The divine arrives through the body's specific movement, not despite it. Ethiopia shows that this was never foreign to Christianity, it was present from the beginning of the African Christian tradition. Saint Yored and the sacred music tradition. Saint Yored is the most important figure in the history of Ethiopian sacred music, the composer and systematizer of the Guizi liturgical chant tradition that is used in Ethiopian Orthodox churches to this day. He is venerated as a saint in the Ethiopian church and is credited with composing the sacred music under direct divine inspiration. The accounts say that 3 birds descended to him from heaven and taught him the music. St. Yored's achievement. The 3 modes. Saint Yored is credited with establishing the 3 primary modes of Guizi sacred chant, Guizi mode, Erare mode, and Ezo mode. These 3 modes organize the entire year's sacred music. The Degwa, the primary collection of Guizi sacred hymns attributed to Saint Yored, a compilation whose use organizes the Ethiopian Church's liturgical year. The Degwa contains hymns for every feast day of the Ethiopian sacred calendar. The oral transmission. The Zema tradition is transmitted orally, from teacher to student, in the specific liturgical schools attached to major Ethiopian churches. A trained Detera has memorized thousands of lines of Guizi sacred text set to specific melodic patterns over years of intensive study. The notation. Ethiopia developed its own musical notation system, using specific marks above and below the text to indicate melodic patterns, rhythm, and performance style. This system is ancient and is still used in teaching the Zema tradition. The sacred status. Saint Yored's music is understood not as human composition performed for a human audience but as divine music received by a saint and offered back to God. Each performance of the Zema is understood as a genuine sacred act, the repetition of the divine music that was first received from heaven. The Za tradition. Spirit possession in Ethiopia. The Za tradition is the spirit possession practice of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Egypt, and the broader Horn of Africa, a pre-Islamic and pre-Christian tradition of spirit possession and healing that has coexisted with Orthodox Christianity and Islam in Ethiopia for centuries, serving populations and addressing needs that the official religions have not fully addressed. What the Za are? The Za are a category of spirit beings, neither the Christian God and saints nor the Islamic Allah and angels, who belong to a third order of sacred reality that both the official religions acknowledge implicitly by failing to eliminate the tradition that serves it. The Za are powerful, capricious, and neither morally good nor morally evil in the Christian or Islamic sense. They are powerful forces who can afflict human beings with specific illnesses, disruptions, and difficulties, and who can be appeased, negotiated with, and ultimately brought into a productive relationship through the specific ceremonies of the Za tradition. The Za, characteristics and types. Affliction. The Za typically makes itself known through affliction. A woman begins experiencing persistent, unexplained illness, emotional disturbance, behavioral changes, or social disruption that does not respond to ordinary medical or religious treatment. The affliction is diagnosed as a Za possession. The Za's identity. Each Za has a specific identity, a name, a personality, specific preferences, and specific demands. The diagnosis process involves identifying which specific Za has afflicted the woman and what it requires. Types of Za. Ancestor Za, spirit of deceased relatives who return to afflict living family members, parallel to the Zulu Amadlozi as a source of illness. Foreign Za, spirits associated with specific ethnic or national identities, each with distinctive personalities and requirements. Nature Za, spirits associated with specific natural features, winds, waters, specific animals. High status Za, spirits of nobles, warriors, physicians, who demand the respect and treatment appropriate to their former status. The gender dimension. The Za tradition is predominantly associated with women, both the practitioners and the primary clients. This has been interpreted anthropologically as a cultural mechanism for addressing experiences of social limitation that official religion does not validate. The Za ceremony. Ritual and practice. The Za ceremony is the primary ritual vehicle for diagnosing, negotiating with, and establishing a productive ongoing relationship with the Za spirit that has afflicted a specific woman. It is conducted by a senior practitioner who has herself experienced a possession and been trained in the tradition. The Za ceremony. Structure. The diagnosis. Before the main ceremony, the Beleza diagnoses the specific Za through a process of direct communication with it, through the interpretation of the afflicted woman's specific symptoms and the Za's specific demands, and through a preliminary ceremony. The gathering. The Za ceremony is a community event, Women gather in a specific home, bringing specific offerings that the Zar has indicated it requires through the diagnosis process. The incense and offerings, specific incenses are burned, the Zar's preferred fragrances served to invite its presence. Specific foods are prepared and offered, the Zar's preferred foods communicate respect and the host's willingness to honor the relationship. The music, specific drums and specific songs call specific Zar. The Zar ceremony's music is the most direct parallel to the Vodou talk, the Candombo talk, and the Zulu Isangomo specific sacred songs. The music is not accompaniment to the ceremony, it is the calling mechanism through which the spirit is invoked. The possession, as the specific Zar songs are sung, the afflicted woman enters trance and the Zar manifests through her body, speaking in the Zar's voice, expressing the Zar's demands, demonstrating the Zar's character. The Beleza negotiates with the manifested Zar. What does it need to release the woman from affliction? What ongoing offerings, ceremonies, or relationships does it require? The agreement, the ceremony culminates in a negotiated agreement between the Zar and the afflicted woman's community, specific ongoing offerings in exchange for the Zar's withdrawal from active affliction and its transformation into a protective relationship. The result, from this point, the woman is understood to be in an ongoing productive relationship with the Zar. It is her Zar, belonging specifically to her, available as a source of insight and power if the agreement is maintained. How Zar and Orthodox Christianity coexist. The coexistence of the Zar spirit possession tradition with Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, in the same villages, practiced by the same people, without apparent contradiction, is one of the most theologically interesting phenomena in the study of African religion. The theological accommodation. Neither the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's official theology nor the Zar tradition's practitioners understand them as mutually exclusive. The most common accommodation operates through compartmentalization with a specific theological rationale. The Zar spirits are real but belong to a category of spiritual beings outside both God and the saints. They are powerful, they must be dealt with, but dealing with them is not the same as worshipping them. A woman can be a devout Orthodox Christian who attends the Kiddes, venerates the saints, and keeps the Ethiopian Church's demanding fasting schedule, while also maintaining her annual Zar ceremony and her ongoing relationship with her specific Zar. The historical pattern. This coexistence follows a pattern seen throughout the African sacred world, the accommodation of pre-existing spirit traditions within the framework of official religions without full elimination. The same pattern appears in Haitian Vodou, in Candombo, in Cuban Lukumi, and in many other African diaspora and African continental contexts. The official religion addresses specific spiritual needs, the spirit possession tradition addresses others. People are not required to choose. Connection to haligicity. The Zar tradition's coexistence with Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity is a living demonstration of what the Jain and Akantevoda principle holds about truth. No single perspective holds the complete picture. The Christian framework is real and complete from within its own logic. The Zar framework is real and complete from within its own logic. Both are operating simultaneously in the same community, addressing different dimensions of the same reality. The Ethiopian sacred world does not perceive contradiction here because it has never accepted the premise that the divine can only be approached through a single official channel. This is perhaps the most holistic thing about Ethiopia. It has always practiced synthesis without calling it that. Rastafari, the Ethiopian theological downstream. Rastafari is the most important theological downstream of the Ethiopian sacred tradition in the contemporary world, the movement that, beginning in Jamaica in the 1930s, took the specific elements of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity and built from them a new theological framework whose influence has spread globally through reggae music, dreadlock culture, and a specific understanding of African liberation. The theological sources of Rastafari. Rastafari's Ethiopian theological foundation. Marcus Garvey's prophecy. Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican Pan-African leader, is credited by Rastafari tradition with a prophecy, "Look to Africa, for the crowning of a black king." Whether or not Garvey intended this literally, his followers interpreted Haile Selassie's 1930 coronation as Emperor of Ethiopia as the fulfillment of this prophecy. Haile Selassie's coronation, when Rastafari Makoen was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, the full Solomonic titles, in an elaborate coronation ceremony attended by representatives of every major world power. The early Rastafari teachers read it through the lens of the Kebra Nagast and the Ethiopian Solomonic tradition. The Solomonic connection, Haile Selassie's lineage traced him directly to Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, making him the fulfillment of the biblical and Ethiopian sacred narrative. The Black King descended from Israel, ruling the sacred African homeland. Ethiopia as Zion, through the Kebra Nagast establishment of Ethiopia as the new sacred center, and through the reading of specific biblical psalms, Rastafari theology identifies Ethiopia/Africa as Zion, the true sacred homeland from which African people were removed by Babylon and to which they will return. Haile Selassie in Ethiopian and Rastafari understanding. Haile Selassie I, born Rastafari Makoen, was the last emperor of Ethiopia, ruling from his coronation in 1930 until his deposition by the Derg Military Council in 1974. He is simultaneously a historical figure of enormous significance, a figure of intense theological significance in the Rastafari tradition, and a significant figure in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. In Ethiopian Orthodox understanding. Within Ethiopia, Haile Selassie is venerated for his role in the resistance against Italian occupation, for his long reign, and for his public commitment to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He was a major benefactor of the church. The current Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum was built by him in 1965. He is not venerated as divine within the Ethiopian Church. He is honored as a great emperor and a faithful Orthodox Christian. In Rastafari understanding. The Rastafari tradition holds Haile Selassie as the returned Messiah, the fulfillment of specific biblical prophecy, the Jah incarnate in human form, the Black King promised by the Solomonic lineage and by Marcus Garvey's prophecy. This theological position is held by practicing Rastafari despite Haile Selassie's own explicit Christian orthodoxy. The Rastafari response to his deposition and death varies by house. Some hold that he has not died but will return. Some hold that his physical death was the shedding of the flesh that does not diminish his divine nature. The haligicity lends the ancient convergence. Ethiopian sacred tradition, in its full complexity of Orthodox Christianity, Guizi sacred language, preserved ancient text, Za spirit possession, Beta Israel Jewish heritage, and Rastafari downstream, is the most complete available example of what genuine sacred synthesis looks like when it grows organically over centuries rather than being constructed intentionally. The Enochic thread. The Book of Enoch, preserved in Ethiopia while Europe forgot it, contains the most developed pre-Christian account of the nature of the divine, the structure of the heavens, and the destiny of the human soul available in any text that predates the New Testament. Its Watcher's narrative provides the backstory for the flood, its Son of Man figure provides the framework that Jesus used, its astronomical writings provide the sacred calendar that the Book of Jubilees extended. The Holy Greek practitioner who has engaged the Egyptian, Hamitic, and Jewish mystical traditions in this library will find in 1 Enoch the missing link, the Second Temple Jewish mysticism that connects the Egyptian tradition to the Jewish tradition to the Christian tradition. The Za and the Holy Greek feeling dimension. The Za tradition's insistence that the spirit world is real, that spirits have specific personalities and specific requirements, that their affliction must be met with specific negotiated relationship rather than general prayer, and that this relationship coexists with orthodox religious practice without contradiction. This is the Holy Greek approach to the spirit world in its most fully developed African continental form. The Za is not dismissed, not exorcised, not denied. It is acknowledged, negotiated with, brought into productive relationship, and from that point becomes a source of protection rather than affliction. Connection to haligicity. Ethiopia is the place where the Bible still has books the West forgot. Where the ancient music plays on instruments that rang Egyptian temples 3,000 years ago. Where the priests carry the ark in procession and the Za moves through bodies in the same villages. Where Haile Selassie's coronation in 1930 sparked a theological movement that spread through reggae music to every continent. Where Second Temple Judaism's most important visionary texts were preserved in a language older than Arabic, waiting for the Dead Sea Scrolls to confirm what the Ethiopian Church had always known. This is the ancient convergence point, the place where Africa, Israel, Egypt, and the earliest Christianity meet and become something no single category can contain. Grand Rising. And Enoch walked with God. And he was not, for God took him. Genesis 5 verse 24, Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God, Psalm 68 verse 31. 2 verses the Ethiopian tradition has held together for 2 millennia. The Guizi is still rising from the monastery above Lake Tana. The Book of Enoch is still in the Ethiopian canon, read by monks who have no idea the Western world forgot it. The Za is still negotiating through the women's ceremonies in the highland villages. The Solomonic thread still runs from Solomon to Makeda to Menelik to Haile Selassie to Bob Marley singing Zion Train in Kingston. Nothing is lost that was truly kept. Grand Rising. Personal Reading Series Halegricity IQ Productions May 2026.